Hello Earthlings, and welcome back. I'm really kind of excited to present this video to you. This is the appearance of Tom Regan on an Irish TV show called The Late Late Show, which is the second longest running late chat show in the world. And it's never been presented before in this format. In other words, the entire thing all in one go. And also I tried to boost the volume too, because the originals are very kind of low. So hopefully this is a revamped and much improved version of it. I kind of support Carolyn Bailey's AR Zone's determination to keep Reagan's legacy and memory alive, because it's very important. Reagan is the foremost authority on rights-based animal rights, and if you've seen my channel before, you'll know that rights are kind of scarce within the animal rights movement, and so Reagan is a very important source of that. So if you want to kind of do check out animal rights in a kind of rights-based sense, then Tom Regan is the person to do it, especially with his groundbreaking book Case for Animal Rights, which is here. So this was 1983, and it's a groundbreaking book. It's kind of written in a fairly conservative way because of the time, and Reagan really started work on this in the late 70s. So we're talking about a kind of product of its time in that sense. So there are some issues with it, but it's still an interesting one. However, I tend not to recommend that book to be your first introduction to Reagan. I prefer to go for this, Defending Animal Rights. And this is a collection of journal articles, and there's some really good ones in there. And it's a kind of an easier way in, if you like, to the case for animal rights than the case for animal rights itself. In fact, this one also is an interesting one, and again it's a kind of like easier read than the case itself, and also lots of parts of the case appear in this the animal rights debate. And if you're going to try and get hold of this one, make sure you don't get confused with the Francione Garner one, because they kind of stole the title Animal Rights Debate, because this was out first. This is Tom Regan and Carl Cohen, and a lot of the kind of case for animal rights is contained in this. And then finally, one that you may be familiar with, a lot of people are familiar with this one, which is Empty Cages, and it's a kind of bit more kind of lightweight than the others, but it's still got some interesting parts in it. But if I wanted to recommend any as a first, taste of Reagan, then I recommend this one from 2001. And speaking of dates, this particular film, we think, was around about the same time. We think it's about 2001 or 2000. This is an old ticket from when the Alliance for Animal Rights invited Reagan to Ireland, and he gave a talk. And so we thought that maybe the appearance on the TV show was at the same time as this. Turns out that can't be true, because Pat Kenny, who's the presenter of this particular show, didn't join the show until 1999. So that could be the earliest time it could have been. So Reagan obviously came to Ireland more than once, and we think it could have been about 2000. So we're still talking about about 20 years ago, I suppose now. It's getting to the stage around about that time anyway. Still, it's a very good video, and as I said, first time it's been kind of put together like this, and so enjoy.
Okay, now just want to say hello to a few people in the audience. Excuse me, what's your name?
Katie.
Katie. What did you have for your evening meal this evening?
I had an omelette.
An omelette?
Yes, cooked by my mum.
Okay, it's an omelette made of eggs?
Yeah.
Which, had they been left alone, would have become little chickens?
Possibly.
All right, okay. What did you have?
Potatoes and fish.
Little fish that swims in the sea?
Yeah.
All right, okay. What did you have?
Chicken.
A chicken? A bit of a chicken.
A bit of a
A
chicken.
bit of a chicken. And what did you have?
Chicken as well.
Okay, a bit of chicken. What did you have, sir?
Steak.
Steak. What sort of steak?
It's a rare steak.
Rare steak.
Rare steak, yeah.
Fresh in off the field, more or less. Yeah. Okay. What did you have?
Some beef.
Beef. Okay, that's very interesting. I mean, people clearly enjoy animal products, but what you had for your tea, many people, well, particularly my next guest, would regard as a barbaric kind of thing to do. He says there is absolutely no justification for having body parts in our freezers. He's called for a complete end to all commerce in the flesh of dead animals. In other words, an end to farming. Animals, he says, have the same rights as humans, and we are being racist in our treatment of them. He's sitting beside me, Professor Tom Regan. You're very welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now, what's interesting, Tom, about you is that you used to be a butcher.
That's true. And first, let me thank you for the opportunity to be here and express my ideas. But yeah, when I was growing up in the industrial part of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, back in the States, I came from a meat and potatoes family.
Yeah.
And for my father, having meat on the table was a sign that he was succeeding. He was living the American dream. And so when I was in college to earn money to help pay the bills for college, I worked as a butcher. And it wasn't anything that I thought about as something raising any kind of ethical question for me at all.
What brought about the change?
Well, so far as I have an insight into that, it was a combination of factors, but the most important thing was my wife, who's Nancy Reagan, by the way. I always tell people that, you know, I'm married to Nancy Reagan, but my wife Nancy and I were active in the anti-war movement during the Vietnam period. And we were thinking that America should not be involved in that war because it involved violence that we didn't think could be justified. And during that period, we thought about other aspects of our life that might involve violence. And we read Gandhi's work, and Gandhi's basically spoke from the page to us, so to speak, and said, if you think that violence against human beings is wrong if you can't justify it, how can you justify those dead body parts you mentioned in your freezer? What's the necessity of that in your life? And if you can justify that, please tell me, Professor Reagan, so to speak. And if not, think about it. And so we thought about it, and we couldn't find a good reason that would justify that kind of violence.
What is the argument you have, though? I mean, from time immemorial, in the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, people have been killing the animals of the earth or taking the fish from the sea in order to provide nourishment for them and their families.
Sure. Well, first off, actually, in the Bible, if we talk about the Bible, and then I'll talk about the other question, part of the question you asked. But in the Bible, if you actually look at what's said in Eden, when Adam and Eve are in Eden, before the fall, before the disobedience, if you look at the diet that's given to human beings in that state of perfection, this is what God hoped for, the best for human beings. It was actually a vegan diet. It was herbs and nuts and berries and the like.
How do we know this?
Well, it says it in Genesis, verse 129.
Did he not give them dominion over all the creatures of the earth?
No, this is after the fall. This is after the period of disobedience and the expulsion from the garden.
But I mean, can I just interrupt you to say that, you know, an apple a day keeps the doctor away, but Eve was told by the Lord to stay away from apples. So, I mean, I don't think we should go too far down that road. It's just that killing the fatted calf, the sacrificial lamb, the loaves and the fishes, you know, it's all there.
Well, I only want to say that that's half of the story, not the whole story. So to the extent that you want to bring the Bible in, the Bible is a mixed message. But the more fundamental point, I think, is this, that we don't think that we find out how we should live by finding out how others have lived in the past. We don't usually make that inference. We don't think that we should be not having our television sets and not using our computers and so on because our ancestors didn't do that. We don't think that we should continue to practice slavery today in America because our ancestors did that. We don't usually reason from the past as a basis for what we should do in the present. And so even if it were true that uniformly in the past all our predecessors have eaten animals, it doesn't follow that we should. And in fact, of course, the vast majority of people in the world today don't eat animals. 2/3 of the world's population doesn't involve animal products.
Do you believe, though, that the reason you shouldn't eat animals is because the animals have the same rights as we have?
I don't think they have all the same rights, and no animal rights person thinks that, Pat. I think that we don't think they should have the right to vote, and we don't think they should have the right to divorce, and we don't think they should have those sorts of rights. What we do think is really very simple. We think that they should have we should recognize the right to be treated with respect in their case that we recognize in your case. And what that means in particular is this. If everybody in the audience would benefit by exploiting you, I would stand up and defend you and say this is not a justified treatment of you just because others are going to benefit. That's what the right to be treated with respect involves. So similarly, what an animal rights person thinks is that other animals should not be treated in the way we treat them just because we're going to benefit from doing it, because we find it convenient, because we find it economically advantageous, because we find it customary, because we find it enjoyable. Those are not sufficiently good reasons to violate somebody's rights.
Where do you stop coming down? I mean, lots of people will say, I would never eat an ape because, you know, they're so like us.
Sure.
And other people say, I'd never eat my pet dog because I know my dog has an intelligence and I like my dog and my dog likes me.
Sure.
But what about the wasp? You know, what about the mosquito?
Right.
Where do you stop in terms of affording respect to other living creatures on the earth?
I think that is a profoundly difficult question, and I always say that wherever you draw the line, draw it with a pencil, because you might want to erase it because you find something out that you didn't know before. But
where do you draw the line?
Yeah, where I draw the line is with animals where we have sufficiently good reason to think that they're not only in the world, but aware of the world, and aware of what happens to them, and that what happens to them matters to them, and in particular, that they can experience pain and pleasure, fear, and relief. So where that is, I'm not sure exactly, but it certainly is the case that the animals that are raised, commercially raised for our food, cattle, sheep, hogs, those animals, chickens, certainly are above the line wherever any reasonable person would draw it. What you do about mollusk and oysters and so on, I don't know. But I give them the benefit of the doubt because I have no reason to eat them.
We used to be certainly meat eaters. Our bodies are equipped to be omnivorous, to eat grains and all the rest of it, or to eat meat.
That's correct.
Okay. If that is so, I mean, doesn't it point in the direction of nature saying, yes, it is perfectly okay in the scheme of things for just as a lion will kill what the lion wants to eat or provide for the pride of lions, so too humans, because of their physiological makeup, are equipped to eat this stuff, so therefore it must be okay.
Well, what our biology tells us, I think, is that we can eat a diet that includes meat. We can certainly handle that.
Yeah.
What our biology doesn't tell us is the ethical question: what ought we to do? How ought we to live? We can never infer that we ought to live a certain way because we can live a certain way. All that gives us is the question of the choice. In the case of the lion, for example, and the wildebeest, the lion and the zebra, it's not like the lion has a choice of saying, well, I think I'll go after this wildebeest today, or I'll go have some tofu or go to the salad bar. I mean, this is not a real option for a carnivore like this. Our great glory and our great burden as human beings is we do have the choice. And the question is, what factors should we bring to bear on making that choice? In terms of personal health, everybody knows, and it's not a question anymore, that a high-fat, high-cholesterol, meat-based diet is not good for us. We all know that.
But a little of what you fancy does you good.
But that doesn't answer the question, well, should we not eat meat at all? That's where the ethical question comes in, I think. And so all I'm saying here is that the mere fact that we can eat meat doesn't mean that we should eat meat.
Okay, so you draw the line. I mean, would you eat lobster?
I would not, no. And as I say, my basis is where do you have sufficiently good reason to think that this animal is not only in the world but aware of the world? And I think that is a difficult question.
If you take the wildebeest you talked about, or a gazelle, and you look at all these nature programs on the National Geographic Channel, as all of us do from time to time, and the lion chases the gazelle, and the gazelle runs away and escapes. It never ceases to amaze me how quickly the gazelle settles down and starts eating the grass again. Now, if that happened to me, I wouldn't hang around where the lion's hanging around. I'd be gone. So it seems to tell us something about, what you're talking about. The gazelle can feel fear. It doesn't have the same effect on the gazelle as it would have on us. I mean, if you were chased by a lion, you wouldn't want to repeat the experience, and yet the gazelle puts him or herself in the way of a repeat experience, and probably in the next few minutes.
Well,
so it tells us something about the limits of their intelligence and how much is instinctive behavior and how much is actually contemplated. I mean, they don't say, will I run or will I not? They just run. I mean, it's absolutely reflex.
I think if we talk to people who study animal behavior, and I don't do it, I'm a philosopher, and of course your line of work is not to study animal behavior, but if we actually go and talk to the Jane Goodalls and the Diane Fosseys and other people who go, ethologists who go and study animal behavior, I mean, they're
studying primates, though, more than...
Yeah, but I mean others who study others. I mean, there are lots of people studying animal behavior of lots of different animals. I think that they would say in a case like the one you're imagining or describing, is that a lot of this is not real behavior. In other words, a lot of it is the lion's really not serious. This is just an exercise of dominance, an exercise of whatever. So and the other animals sometimes, I think, recognize that. But the important thing, I think, for us, though, is not to lose track of where we are in the world. We're not on the Serengeti Plain. We're not in a predator-prey relationship. Our situation is that we are raising literally billions of animals to be slaughtered, not on some plain, but in some factory farms. And what we've seen recently here in Great Britain, of course, or over there in Great Britain, is the tragedy of the cost of this kind of farming. And people were beginning to realize, it's so interesting to me, the great public support for this woman in Scotland who has these 5 sheep.
In her living room.
That's right, in her living room, trying to protect these 5 sheep. They're her pets, and the great mass of sentiment in her defense because of the relationship that she has to those animals as her pets or her companion animals.
Yeah. It turns out that she hardly knows them. She bought them from an Irishman who's going back to live in Northern Ireland. And, I mean, she just wanted to give them a happy home so they could live out their lives in peace and die a natural death. But she doesn't know them that well.
Well, I'm not sure how well she knows them, but what I do know is that when the public speaks about this issue, they say, with a pretty strong majority, that these animals should be saved and protected and so on. But at the same time, the animals that are raised for lamb chops and a lamb roast, like a lamb, are in a different category. And it does point out, doesn't it, that we have a kind of moral schizophrenia, all of us, in the sense that the animals that are our friends and companions are in one category.
Okay, once you put a name on Daisy the cow, Daisy is not to be slaughtered. But we have someone, Eugene Kieran's, who is a butcher. Eugene, what do you make of this kind of philosophy?
Well, I'm very interested in it, and you're very welcome to Ireland. And you certainly are not what I thought you were going to be, namely a fundamentalist. And at least you say the word choice many times, your choice of thinking. You're not trying to impose anything. But really, you know, we're products of millions of years of evolution. Millions and millions of years of evolution. And I think that in an affluent society, people tend to think that the cow has cartons of milk rather than being milked itself. And if you put a lady behind a trolley in a supermarket where she can push the trolley along on the wheels, pour away nice and quietly, the music plays, and she shops for her family by taking things off a shelf. There's not many generations before that things were vastly different. And I'm talking with the blink of an eye in relation to the millions of years. And it is really a fanciful idea, dare I say fancy, in the kindest possible way, that it is a bit much to ask people to go with your philosophy, and dare I say, as a butcher for 40 years, the respect that I would hold for the animal that gives me my living and feeds Ireland, and has fed Ireland for years, and sent us 30, 40 million of us now all claim to be Irish all over the world.
Okay, I think we get your point. You're saying that if you take the passage of time, the history, the change that is being wrought here is literally the blink of an eye. And what you're trying to do is to turn us into something we're not in a historical time span that is really far too fast.
Well, First, I want to thank you for your comments and say that whenever I have a disagreement with a butcher or any other person who's involved with directly with animals, it's never a question of my attacking the person, but trying to address the issues themselves. And so, what I think is that as a philosopher, what matters to me is where the strengths of the arguments are. And when I've thought about it, I mean, it seems to me the strengths of the arguments are in favor of the view that I'm trying to expound. Now, to get society, in terms of a mass movement, to agree with that idea, obviously is going to take a long time. It's not something that is going to happen in the blink of an eye. But of course, what we know is, as a matter of historical fact, the people who have wanted to change society in fundamental ways have always faced the same kinds of challenges. In my country, and I don't mean to associate the two ideas completely at all, but in my country, there was a protracted effort to end slavery, as you know. And the people who first started to end slavery had all the odds against them, and people said to them, what you're asking for is impossible.
And you actually make that comparison, that it is the way we treat animals today is the way we treated blacks in the past, the way not too many generations ago we treated women.
In some respects, but not in all respects, because we're not denying animals the right to an education, the right to that sort of thing. But in terms of the habits of the culture, in terms of the sensibility that's brought to bear on a position of power, yeah, because we had the power over the women. Men had power over women.
Though if you take this to its logical conclusion, I mean, all animals just get out there, breed, eat the grass. If your elephants trample the local villages, if you're lions and you're getting old, kill humans instead of gazelles. I mean, is that what you're saying?
No, because what we know is this. Like everybody in the audience, I think we would all recognize that we are sitting here and we all share certain basic fundamental rights. But what happens, of course, is sometimes our rights come into conflict. And so if we have one kidney and 7 people who need it, what do we do in a case like that? It's not we say, well, everybody has a right. We don't know what to do in difficult cases like that. So similarly, if we say that animals have a basic right to be treated with respect, that doesn't mean that it means that we're never going to come in conflict with their rights.
Okay, but would you put all humans ahead of all animals?
What do you mean ahead, I guess?
I mean, if you had a choice, you're in a boat, you know this question,
sure.
You've got a despicable human being down one end of the boat, and you've got a very smart dog, your pet for life, up the other end of the boat, and you can save one of them. Which do you save?
I think that is a very difficult question, and I'm not sure I know an answer that's going to give...
but it's not the simple one that you would save the human. It's not that simple. You might save the dog.
Look, if it was it was like the Burt Breathed who does Far Side, the cartoons. I mean, he makes the point of if it was the dog and Hitler, who would you throw over? I mean, I don't think anybody would think twice about throwing Hitler over, would they? Would they? Yeah. But I mean,
if it was Hitler's dog and Hitler, who would you throw? I don't know. Mick is there. Mick Riley, you are actually in the production of meat, isn't that so? Yeah. So
I am. You're very welcome, Tom.
Thank you.
Again, you're looking very healthy for a fellow who hasn't eaten meat for 40 years or whatever.
What sort of production are you in, Mick?
I'm breeding pigs and turkeys.
How many pigs and turkeys would you sell out every year?
Thousands of them.
Thousands of them.
Well, you have to do that because we make so little money on each of them. You have to have thousands to make a living.
And tell me this, Mick. What is your attitude? I mean, your behaviour philosophically now. He doesn't hold it against you, but philosophically, it's barbaric.
Well, I'm very interested in what he has to say, and I must say, you have a very gentle way of putting it across. But I think, quite honestly, it's a mishmash of conflicting ideas. Now, I don't want to get into a sort of a point-for-point debate with you, but to say that foot and mouth was a consequence of factory farming in England is absolute nonsense, because, you know, sheep running around a field, who are the main carriers, unfortunately, of this blooming plague.
Sure.
But the sheep who are running around the field in England, they cannot be, for any instance, be described as factory farming. So, I mean, you know, that's out of it. Also, I think humans are extremely lucky being the top of the food chain, and we have a choice. But having a choice, we also have responsibilities. Now, I think it's wrong to assume that there's an act of violence committed towards an animal when he or she is being prepared for the food chain. they're reared properly, they're reared humanely, they're treated properly and fed, etc. Because if you don't do that, they're not going to grow properly anyway. And it's not a violent end, it's because the animal has no consciousness like we have. I think that's very important. The gazelle didn't run away from the lion, as Pat was saying, because the gazelle had no consciousness of that this lion is going to have me for breakfast in the morning. The gazelle was just saying, here's a lion, maybe he's going to chase me, get out of his way, he doesn't like the smell of pepper for a while. There's no consciousness on the animal's part. Luckily, we humans have. Now, the other thing is, if we give rights to animals, for instance, they have choice, they can go to discos, or, well, they can't vote, like you say, and quite rightly. But if they have, if we bestow some rights on animals, and we say, right, we go down the line to, let's say, dogs and cats and pigs and cattle and sheep, which would be the first ones I think we would go for, which would be terrific. But how the hell do you stop the cat chasing the mouse then? You see, the animals then don't bestow rights on other animals, and there's no respect.
All right,
so
yeah, what about
it'd be
that?
a waste of time, quite
It's a
frankly.
good point, Mick. We're at the top, and you're asking us to bestow rights on these creatures that are down below us in the order of things. But the fox doesn't give the chicken any rights, the cat doesn't give the mouse any rights, or the little bird in the tree. The magpie gives nobody rights, as far as we can figure it out. So why should we be the ones who exercise all the responsibility?
Well, if you think about the human situation, and I appreciate your comments and thank you for the spirit in which they're made, but if you think about the situation, we don't demand reciprocity even within the extended human family. In other words, it is the case that here we are in a situation that you have rights and I have rights, and I'm to respect your rights and you respect my rights. We don't require that all the time of human beings. We don't require of children, for example, that they must respect our rights before we respect their rights.
But do we
okay,
and that's fair enough,
right.
that we don't, sometimes the poor, the undernourished and so on, we look after them and we don't expect them to do anything in exchange.
That's right.
But do we have responsibility to to stop the mouse being killed by the cat? I mean, that is violent. It's what a way to go, being eaten by a cat, or even played with by a cat, not even eaten.
Yeah. I think in the case of predator-prey relationships, that is, in the case where there are natural predators against natural prey, that's a disanalogous situation to ours. In the case of predator-prey relationships, what happens 99% of the time is the prey is able to get away from the predator. I mean, if that were not the case, there would not be any prey left for the predators to go after.
So it's a gamble.
So the point is, no, that what we have in the predator-prey relationship, or we have individuals who are capable of taking care of themselves without our having to take care of them. So we don't have to intervene in that. But I want to go back to, if I may, to the question about the lifeboat. What do you do in a lifeboat situation? What's important about that is not only asking the question, well, what do you do in an extreme case like that? What do you do in an extreme case like that? For example, suppose you're driving home, your house is on fire, your neighbor's house is on fire, your daughter's in your window and your neighbor's daughter's in the next window, and you can only save one of them. What do you do in a case like that? It seems to me we'd all say, well, you save your daughter, of course. But that doesn't mean we think, well, you have no obligations to your neighbor's daughter, or that somehow she's not on the moral map. And so the point is, what you would do in an extreme case like in the lifeboat, it doesn't transfer to the ordinary case. What do you do today in your life? Because you're not on a lifeboat. You're not in an extreme case. You're here and you're in the restaurant and you have a menu in front of you and you can order this or you can order that. That's not a lifeboat situation.
Do I have the boring salad, or do I have the coq au vin?
I hope you have neither, actually. I mean, the point is this. Growing up in the meat and potatoes family like I did, I thought about vegetarianism like this. There was a salad and a baked potato and a steak, and what was left is you took the steak off and you had the salad and the baked potato.
And it's more interesting
But
than
the
that,
vegetarian's more interesting than that.
You're a meat eater.
Absolutely. I mean, I actually like to name my food. I like to personally pick out the lobsters that I eat and call them all Mr. Pinchy, and really enjoy actually eating them.
You have no guilt about selecting one of those 10 lobsters
see, this
for
is
death.
nobody involved in this argument has actually said the primary function, which is that we eat meat because we can. It's as simple as that. And, I mean, Tom can come up with sort of his various different arguments, and the butchers come up there for sort of statistical proof, whatever. We eat meat because we like to eat meat. And there is certainly, the idea of actually saying that animals have rights is completely ludicrous. We might have certain responsibilities towards animals because we're at the top of the food chain. And there's almost this sort of human guilt. It's like a PC, species basis, that we're top of the food chain. We will eat things all the time. In person, I actually quite like going up to. I'd like to lick a cow to make sure that it's ripe before I have a steak, kind of thing. Just to be, and I don't really have a moral problem with that whatsoever. And I have to say, what we're getting is a brilliant sugar-coated version of the animal rights movement tonight. And I have to say, I have to compliment you, Tom. You're doing a fantastic version, because I know your work and I've gone through your websites and stuff like that, and we're not seeing the extreme, and the logical conclusion of the views that are coming through from this, you know. But no, you see, there is no moral responsibility for us not to eat meat. It doesn't even come within our moral framework whatsoever. Now, the thing is, on a basic level, because we have evolved so far beyond, you don't want to basically sort of beaten up some animal before you kill it. But we like meat. It's simple as that. As a species, we like to eat meat. Kids, instinctively, will like to snack on a burger or whatever. And you can bring in all the health arguments you want or whatever, but don't try and put it into some sort of philosophical thing, because Nietzsche will then come around and say exactly the opposite of what you're saying.
Okay, there's a lady behind there. Yes, what do you want to say?
Well, I'm hearing a lot about evolution tonight, and after hearing the last speaker, I'm not so sure we've evolved so far, quite frankly. Most people, I think, you know, would cringe at the sight of an animal being treated cruelly. If their dog, for example, was treated cruelly, they would try to stop it immediately. I have visited intensive pig units. I grew up on a farm, and I know this is a cliche, but I think it's very true. If slaughterhouses had glass walls, I think most people would be vegetarian, because I don't think there are many people like that who enjoy the fact that what they're putting into their mouth has suffered before it was actually killed, or that it has lived a bad life. And I think we have to believe in the innate goodness of people, and we have to inform people about what's going on. And I think education is the key.
Ian?
That's a classic example of the horribly intellectually smug attitude that you tend to get from an awful lot of vegetarians.
Answer the question.
No, the thing about it is, right, I mean, you can say, for example, oh, it's not nice to actually kill an animal. But of course it's not nice to kill an animal. Nobody wants to see an animal being killed.
Well, then don't
eat
it.
No, but that's basically like saying, I mean, if I see a woman having a child, it's not a nice process. It's not going to stop me having sex. This is one of those things.
God help the woman.
You go through ludicrous bunkum arguments. Of course, nobody wants to see a bullet going through a cow's head or whatever. But these things happen, and it's a process that we have to.
They don't happen
Are we prepared
naturally.
to accept it?
Sorry.
Yes, I am. As a person who's conscious, quite happy to accept that fact. And yes, I will pick out a lobster that's live, and I will throw it into the pot.
Yeah.
And I had a beautiful fillet steak tonight, and I sat there and I was thinking, coming on, and went, that cow died for a good reason, because I had a bloody good meal and it was worth it, you know.
Can I just ask Nuala, the question about you know, what would happen to the animal in the end? Would they all die of old age? I mean, I've often wondered why you don't see ancient robins in the garden, you know, with grey feathers. And the reality is that once they become infirm, they are either killed by crows or eaten by foxes or whatever. That's, I mean, they have a pretty nasty death in the end.
Well, Pat, you know, I don't think you have to worry.
You
don't have to worry about Donnybrook being overrun by cows or anything like that. I mean, these animals exist in large quantities because we breed them for that purpose. Yeah. And we, frankly, I suppose, don't know what would happen because we never let them live their lives.
No,
to
what I'm
the
saying
full
is
span.
that if you were to allow, for example, the sheep on the mountain, and they're going to die naturally, many of them would die in drains when they're too old to pick themselves up. All I'm saying is that they're going to end, as we all are, one way or the other. And there is a view that says a humane, quick death in your prime is actually preferable.
So that's why we eat meat.
Preferable.
Right.
No, I'm just suggesting that to
No,
you.
we
Is
eat meat because we
preferable
like it.
to
We
being
don't all like
devoured.
it, actually,
It's as
so
simple
we
as
don't.
that.
No, if you listen to the point I'm making, it's preferable to being devoured while still half alive by one of the predators in nature. That's an argument.
Well, it's an argument, Pat, but I don't think it holds much water, frankly, because these animals, for the most part, especially poultry and pigs, live completely unnatural lives in totally artificial situations.
Mick, you're one of the people who's accused of that.
We can talk all night about blood and guts and gore and everything, I mean, which is not a pretty scene. Like, I'm sure if somebody was taking out your appendix, it wouldn't necessarily be sort of make front page news. I mean,
but
if you
one
put
is
a glass
one
wall
is to
around
save
it-
your life.
If you put a glass wall around an operating theatre, these things exist, these things go on. Like I said before, I mean, the animal, fortunately for it, has no consciousness of impending death, you know? It's done humanely. Now, luckily, we have a choice in all this. I can do as Tom does. I can eat, I presume, beans or cabbage or lettuce, whatever, fine, and lentils. I don't like that stuff. I would eat a certain amount of it, yes, but I would like some fish. I would like some beef. I'd steak like I had this evening. some eggs, chicken, whatever. I mean, we're extremely fortunate. Now, Tom also said, and this is where, if you want a bit of tragedy in it, he said that 2/3 of the people on the planet don't get meat. And I think that's an appalling situation. But the reason they can't get it is not by choice, unfortunately. It's because of the economic problems which we have in the world, some of which are created by perhaps the country that you came from yourself. Now, and I don't want to start a political argument here, but, you know, we are extremely fortunate in the first world to have a choice. If you like eggs, or if you like steak, if you like lettuce, by all means eat it. Now, don't gorge on it. I mean, balance it up so that at least you have a little bit of everything.
Okay.
And that's what makes it interesting.
Right, Tom.
Yeah.
You've heard the arguments.
I've heard an awful lot, yeah. And I think what I've heard is stated several times is we eat meat because we can eat meat. We eat meat because we enjoy eating meat. But, I mean, I don't think that really addresses any moral issue. I mean, just because you can do something, you enjoy do something, doesn't answer any question about whether you should do it. I mean, you just can't make that inference. You need an independent argument. I'm not saying you don't have an argument, just saying that's not an argument for eating meat, that I can. The other thing is the suggestion that what I'm giving is a sugar-coated version of animal rights. I'm giving my version of animal rights. I'm not giving the sugar-coated version of animal rights. I mean, there is a media conception, a popular conception of animal rights as a bunch of thugs, lawbreakers, or Three Stooges activists running through the streets naked or throwing pies in people's faces or something like that. That's not what I represent. I mean, and what's very important for everybody in the audience and everybody watching the show is not to think that there is just a monolithic animal rights movement that is represented by the media.
Okay.
In all due respect to the media.
One last question to you, Tom, and before we conclude, and that is the theory now that the reason we evolved from the apes is that we developed the ability to use weapons and kill prey. And it was the extra protein provided by meat which allowed our brains to grow and allowed us to become what we are. Isn't that a telling argument in favor of eating meat?
You know, I don't think so, because what that would show once more is that, if true, is that something happened in the past that involved our killing animals to arrive at a certain level of evolution. But it doesn't follow that because this has happened in the past, we have to continue to do it in the present or into the future.
Tom Regan, thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you very much.
Tom Regan. All right. Food for thought. I think you'll agree, from Professor Tom Regan. That's all we've time for. Back on the radio Monday morning, not at 10, but at 9 on Bank Holiday Monday. Back here next Friday night. Hope you enjoy the show. Good night.